The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
After more than a decade and a half of social media, is your democracy better off now than it was before? The Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression doesn't think so. Tonight they'll tell us why and how good policy could help. Then we'll speak to Dr. Anna Lemke about her new book, Dopamine Nation, on the seesaw battle between technology and our brains. It's Tuesday, June the 14th, and that's next on The Agenda. Any conversation about democracy today invariably includes a range of anxiety about social media. While platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and so on can bring people together, they can just as easily be used to distort or misinform. An initiative started 2 years ago by the Public Policy Forum set out to find solutions. It's called the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression, and it's issued a comprehensive report. Let's find out what they learned and recommend as we welcome 3 members of the Commission. The 2 co-chairs, Beverly McLaughlin, 17th Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada. She's in the nation's capital. And Taylor Owen, Director of the Centre for Media, Technology and Democracy at McGill University. He's in Montreal, Quebec. And also in the nation's capital, Commissioner Vivek Krishnamurthy, Director of the Samuelson Glushko Canadian Internet Policy and Public Interest Clinic at the University of Ottawa. And we are delighted to welcome you 3 back onto our airwaves tonight here on TVO. I guess protocol dictates that we start with the former Chief Justice, so let's do that. Ms. McLaughlin, what's the overarching mission of your commission?
We wanted to look at how best the internet and digital communications can be regulated and should be regulated in Canada. As everybody knows, around 2005, society underwent what is called by some the fourth or whatever industrial revolution, and we changed dramatically how we communicate. We had digital communication, we had platforms, we had blogs, we had online sites with people contributing. And as you say, this contributed a lot to communications and revolutionized the way we communicate. But there was no legal structure, no structure at all to say what the limits were on how these new forms of communication should take place. So various countries around the world in the years that have followed have been grappling with this issue of how best to curb any excesses and prevent harms from this new digital mode of communication. And the answers aren't easy. But the key is, notwithstanding all the good that is produced by the digital communications and platforms, and we all know the sort of Facebook type, Twitter, notwithstanding all the good, there are harms that can happen, and these are serious harms. And in terms of defamation, in terms of hate crime, in terms of pornography, in terms of loss of privacy. And society needs to do something to prevent citizens, people, from becoming victims of these harms, of sometimes crimes.
Well, maybe I can get Taylor to build on that answer in this respect. Are you folks at your commission more concerned about the behavior exhibited by the people who use these social media platforms, or the platforms themselves and what they apparently are content to let people get away with?
Yeah, I think you framed that the right way, because as the Chief Justice mentioned, countries around the world are all struggling with the dilemma of how do you minimize what are clearly now understood harms of these digital systems without minimizing or hurting all the amazing things that the internet does for us in terms of maximizing speech, maximizing political engagement. And there are 2 approaches that have emerged on how to do this. One is, as you say, to deal with the harmful content itself. So the things that are out in the world that are bad, and to try and get rid of them. And it's kind of understandable why we would want to do that. Those are the things we see and feel. They're the things politicians see and feel, citizens see and feel on the internet. And the German government, for example, went down that route. They said, platforms, you need to take down all of this particular kind of bad content in a very short period of time, or you'll be fined significant amounts. And initially, the Canadian government signaled that it was going to go down that path as well. But there's an alternative model emerging that I think really is becoming the global standard in democratic societies, which is, as you say, to not regulate the content and what can and can't be said, except in the most extreme cases of potentially child pornography or terrorist content or clear incitement to violence. But in most other cases, I think from a regulatory perspective, we can be much more effective by addressing the system itself, by the incentives in the design of these platforms that maybe allow harmful speech to be maximized, allow people to be targeted with harmful speech, create incentives for harmful content rather than beneficial content to a democracy. So that's the path we've recommended. And frankly, it's where the EU or the UK, where also a whole number of like-minded democratic societies are headed.
And Vivek, maybe I'll get you to pick up the story there, because it certainly seems to many observers as if these platforms, these companies, social media companies, have a built-in mission to inspire people to be as angry and engaging in their anger as possible, because, of course, more anger begets more usage begets more eyeballs begets more advertising. That's built-in toxicity. How do you get around that?
So this is a real challenge with these platforms, and it's actually not a new challenge when we think about it. There were a lot of media critics mid-century who were talking about if it bleeds, it leads, and how TV is this vast wasteland because of commercial incentives, right? We want to create popular content. So social media, of course, amplifies some of those trends on steroids, right? Because it's much more effective at targeting content precisely and at responding to what people seem to like because of the use of algorithms to curate that content. So part of what I think we need to do here is that, there's a lot of good in that model too. It is able to show people what they want and bring people together with things that they're interested in. So part of it is really just moderating some of the excesses of that business model by not necessarily undermining it completely. I think ad-supported services have a lot. There's a lot of good that they provide in terms of access, right? But the point is that we want to be able to identify when those systems either incentivize harmful content, distribute it to people who clearly are harmed by it, and in a very targeted way, change those incentive structures so that platforms aren't profiting, or the content creators, for that matter, are profiting from that kind of harmful content.
Well, let's go into this alternative model that the three of you have unveiled in your commission's report and recommendations. And I guess, broadly speaking, they come under three themes. And the first is transparency. So, Madam Chief Justice, let's start there. How do platform companies, in your judgment, get more transparent?
Well, I think governments need to incentivize transparency or regulate it somehow. Right now, there's, or at least in the past, there's been very little transparency. The companies who develop the platforms come up with their own algorithms, and nobody knows what those algorithms are or exactly how they work. And you have this feeling sometimes when you click onto something and you feel that you are being targeted because of some transaction you did or whatever. People have this feeling, but they don't know exactly what the algorithms are doing out there to target them. And when you get into the amplification of hate and terrorism and that kind of thing, this can be very, very serious. So I think what we want to promote is more transparency in these algorithms. Instead of it being just a black box, nobody knows. We would hope that these algorithms could be shared at some level, that academics and thoughtful people could look at them and see what they are doing and how they are building their structures and encouraging people to get online, et cetera, et cetera. This is not nefarious for most platform content, but when you get into terrorism, when you get into hate, when you get into some very serious conspiracy or racist theories, the way people are targeted and how they're targeted, and young people being targeted, kids being targeted, this becomes very important. So we're hoping that we can get more transparency to see whether those things are happening, and if and when they're happening, to disincentivize them.
Well, Taylor, I do want to raise the red flag with you that the Chief Justice hinted at there, because giving, admittedly, an arm's length regulator top-level access to these platforms will sound plenty concerning to some people. Now, tell us why we shouldn't be concerned about this.
Well, I think we absolutely should be concerned about that. And I think the core principle of making data transparent should not be to give those data and powers necessarily to a regulator, but to give them to, in one level, to citizens. So what should we as users have more access to information about? So things like ad targeting, for example. Should we as a public, as citizens in a democracy, have more information about how our behavior is being targeted and us as users are being targeted with these very powerful behavioral advertising tools that the platforms sell? Canada has already made that mandatory during elections. We're just saying that probably that should be all the time. We as citizens should probably have that right all the time. But there's another level of data that gets at that power asymmetry that the Chief Justice was mentioning, which is, at the moment, we know these platforms have a tremendous effect on our lives, on our politics, on our social cohesion. And yet there is a real power asymmetry with the knowledge of that potential harm and potential benefit. The platforms have access to all of these data and can do studies on it. And us as citizens or as researchers don't have access to that. So what we're saying is, don't give those data, these more sensitive data, to governments, but allow a certain level of research access to them. And again, this is what's a norm that's emerging globally. The EU is doing this, the UK is going to do this, Australia has done this, which is create places and privacy-protected environments where researchers and qualified experts can engage with these data and better understand these systems from a public perspective, not just from the corporate perspective.
All right, Vivek, we mentioned a few moments ago that there's sort of three general themes under which your recommendations come. We've done the first, transparency. Let's go on to the second, accountability. How can you hold social media platforms more accountable?
So to build on some of what the Chief Justice and Professor Owen described, we're taking an approach in this commission of prevention of harms rather than addressing harm after it's occurred. So a key part of that is, what does the accountability mechanism look like for a platform? Is it that you are liable for something bad that's happened after it happens? Or should we try to hold you to a standard that requires you to take actions to prevent those harms in the first place? So the centerpiece, I think, of this report and of our approach is this idea of the duty to act responsibly. So it would be a new legal duty that's going to need to develop, and it's purposefully vague for a reason, which is that we sort of discussed, do we want to have a really detailed set of standards or rules as to what these companies have to do? And there's a wide variety of companies with different services and business models, and there's a lot of evolution in this sector too. So we came up with this idea. It's a broad duty, and we started to flesh it out. But the idea is that it would develop in time through the regulator, through litigation, and through interaction with the public and civil society. So the core of the duty, as we see it, is, first of all, a requirement for platforms and other actors in this space to understand what the risks are of their business model, so to conduct risk assessments. Second, moving from that, is to show that you're acting upon the risk assessments, right? That there's meaningful change in terms of the systems you have to detect harms, how well you're performing, et cetera. And then that's backed up at the end with accountability mechanisms for those who don't do well enough. And the idea is not so much to penalize platforms for making the wrong call on a specific piece of content or a specific incident where they did not respond well enough. But the idea is that if you're showing a systemic failure to address the risks that emerge because of the kind of business that you have, at that point, there would be some kind of liability. So this is, quite a different approach from what the government had presented last summer when it engaged in a public consultation. That model was really, as Professor Owen mentioned, built on the German model of, if there are certain kinds of content that fall into certain categories, you must take it down very quickly, otherwise you face fines. Our aim is to say, build the system to prevent that kind of content from either appearing on your platform or from being widely distributed in the first place. And we're going to try to hold you accountable for that instead.
Well, Madam Chief Justice, let me pick up at the end of that answer then with you. And that is, I think we all understand this sort of statutory duty to act responsibly. And I just wonder, well, let's see how far that goes. Does this duty for the platforms to act responsibly mean, for example, that Facebook could be held partially responsible for the actions that took place on the 6th of January of last year in the American Capitol? Because after all, a lot of people involved in that activity, that insurrection, used Facebook to help them organize and attack the Capitol.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very good question. And as I think Vivek mentioned, we haven't filled in the content of the duty to act responsibly yet. Our model was the common law negligence doctrine, which says that you have to go on the principle that everyone is your neighbor and that you are not going to commit foreseeable harm, or you will not negligently overlook foreseeable harm and cause harm to your neighbor. So I think foreseeability will probably have a big role to play in this as it develops. But we are at very early stages here, and we're going to have to see exactly how this duty develops in specific situations, which will take into account the peculiarities, the features of digital communications and platforms and so on. I would hope that foreseeable harm would be caught. Was January 6th foreseeable? I would leave that to others. But the idea would be that you should act responsibly. You should look ahead. You should look down the road and say, is what we're seeing pass on our platform right now likely to hurt somebody? Probably. Will it hurt somebody? We should expect platforms to ask those questions and have their systems set up so those questions are asked. And as this develops, it will achieve greater detail and sophistication, we hope.
Well, Taylor, I'd open up the other end of the Pandora's box and ask a different kind of question, because it's not unforeseeable that somebody who's a typical user of one of these platforms would say, you know what, you're infringing on my free speech rights and I'm going to sue you for doing so. Have you anticipated that?
Well, these are, as we are regularly reminded, private platforms that can set their own rules. So largely, when one opts into these platforms, one is also opting in to their particular policies, not just about what can and can't be said, but what the incentive structure are for certain kinds of speech to be amplified to large numbers of people. So yes, we want to maximize everybody's right to speak, but we don't in turn need to allow for the incentives for harmful speech to be amplified even further. And that's a fundamental difference there, I think. And just to build briefly on Chief Justice's answer about January 6th, I think we can use this model that around risk assessments and risk mitigation to tell us something about how, perhaps if this system was in place, platforms might have behaved somewhat differently. So if I was a platform and doing regular risk assessments over something like, for example, the recommendation algorithm that recommends people into groups on Facebook, I might have seen that people were being recommended into increasingly radicalizing organizing groups that were organizing and speaking about violence at the Capitol. Now, my risk mitigation strategy might have been to turn down that algorithm that was recommending people into those groups. It may or may not have. If I then learned something about that radicalization around the January 6th event in the United States, and I saw something similar happening in Canada, a risk mitigation strategy might have used that knowledge to downplay and minimize that risk in Canada. But right now, that is not how the incentive structure incentivizes the platforms to calibrate their systems. But I think this kind of model of risk assessment, risk mitigation strategy, and ultimate accountability from a regulator changes that incentive structure.
All right, Vivek, let's move on to you then for the third theme or bucket in which you folks have made recommendations, namely empowering users. How do you shift the balance of power to users and away from the platforms?
That's a great question, and it's one that we struggled with. The way that large platforms have developed, it involves a real centralization of power in a very opaque way. So platforms collect a great deal of data about users. They buy that data often from commercial sources. They're able to track what they do on their platform in very fine-grained ways, such as, where do you move your mouse? What do you hover over? Use that, of course, to sell advertising, and often make it really, really hard for competitors to develop or for people to access alternative services. So there's a few important things that we focused on, and again, this is consistent with what's happening internationally, especially in Europe, but even to some extent in the United States. So one of our key recommendations, and this sort of falls more into a privacy law reform, and we think that privacy, again, is very linked up with this set of issues, is that people should be able to take their data with them if they want to use a competing service. So that's the idea of data portability, right? The data is yours. And, we don't need to get into the legal debate on, is it property? How do you own it? The point is that you should be entitled to a copy of it that you can take. So if you're unsatisfied with Twitter and you want to move to a different service, you can do that. There are some difficult issues there. Your data is linked up with the data of others intrinsically on social media, right? If you and I are in a conversation, Steve, on social media, I have some of your information. So that needs to be reconciled.
Well,
second,
okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, let me follow up with the Chief Justice on that, which is to say, can you imagine these companies? I mean, the data is the gold mine, right? The data for them is what it's all about. Can you imagine them allowing you that kind of portability with your data, which essentially strikes at the very heart of how they make money?
Well, I can imagine it. And I think that it might well happen because there is a great public interest in this. People have an interest, citizens have an interest in their data, in seeing it, in being able to take it to another site. And so it's not beyond comprehension that a government would say, we need to have portability. Citizens need to have these rights, and people need to have these rights. And there has to be, of course, a compromise, but things have to be worked out. And I could see platforms buying into that and recognizing that they have to, because after all, they have this huge privilege of operating and affecting people, and in many sophisticated ways. And with that has to come a responsibility, and part of that is recognizing that people have an interest in their data, and that is going to be a challenge. I agree, but I think it's a pretty fundamental proposition that we're all going to have to come to grips with, including the platforms.
Vivek, I think I interrupted you. You wanted to make a second point.
Oh, yes. Just the second big point that we focused on is the idea that there should be interoperability, which is that platforms and other digital services should be designed to interface with each other. So I think we've all encountered the frustration where you have a WhatsApp account, you have a messaging feature in Twitter, you have a messaging feature in Instagram, you name it, and all these things are walled off, and you have to open up 17 different apps to communicate on these different platforms. The idea that that's really, hostile to users. So we should create technical mandates to try to make these services work together as much as possible. And that's a win for users in terms of empowering them. It's also great for promoting competition, right? It means that a new service can emerge and start to link up with legacy services and try to outcompete with them. So that's also an important part of user empowerment as we see it.
I totally get that point, but Taylor, I am trying to imagine you folks or whoever you charge with doing this going up to Elon Musk someday, if he ever manages to take over Twitter eventually, and say to him, I know you've got billions of tweets that you have enabled people to use over the course of the 15 years that you've been in business, and it was your technology that got it started, and it's your platform that allowed people to communicate this way, and we're now going to tell you that you have to allow people to take all of that data, whatever, that you've allowed to have happen, and we're going to let your competition have at that as well. I'm trying to imagine how that conversation's going to go. I mean, I think I know how that conversation's going to go.
Sure. I mean, I don't in any universe think they will do this voluntarily, but I'm not sure that's our concern. When Elon Musk made broad pronouncements about radically changing the content moderation policy of Twitter should his bid to purchase it be successful, Thierry Breton in the EU said, okay, I don't particularly care what you think your content moderation policies are going to be. They will have to abide by European law. And we actually have a higher bar for content moderation policy. So I mean, that is the right of Europe as a jurisdiction to impose laws on platforms that provide services to their citizens. We also have that right in Canada. And what's more, democratic governments are beginning to align in their demands of these countries. So it is not just Europe, it is not just Germany, it is not just the UK or Canada asking this of these platforms. It is all of them increasingly in an aligned way. And if you don't think the platforms care about that size of market, particularly if you start adding in some American states that are heading this direction as well, then I think that governance demand is going to override whatever these companies might prefer.
Well, Chief Justice, can you sort of play that out for us? I'm interested in how you see this unfolding, because I can certainly imagine massive fights, lawsuits from now till the end of time, or somehow they cooperate. I don't know which way it's going to go. Do you have a feeling about it?
Well, I do feel that it will succeed, at least in part. I look back in history when people started regulating motor vehicles when they were first invented, or pick another technology. But anyway, suddenly people said we have to have some rules. We have to have responsible conduct here for how people are operating their motor vehicles. So we're going to put in a whole code of driving, what you have to do. Then we added to that manufacturers' obligations. Manufacturers have to build in safety features. They're held liable if the vehicles are not safe. And you end up with hundreds of thousands of regulations around driving, around motor vehicles, around highway operation, et cetera, et cetera. A whole system is built up, and it becomes voluntary. Everybody, in the end, says yes, for the good of society, for everybody, we have to cooperate on this, or the harms will be too great. And there were fights along the way. I remember when I was quite young, the rule came in that people had to wear seatbelts in their cars. Well, there was a huge fight over that, and many people refused. But ultimately, compliance was established. So I can see the same sort of thing happening in this sphere.
Now, that argument works if we assume that an actual highway and the information highway are analogous. And many people are going to suggest that they're not, that one of the reasons they love using the internet is because there are no quote unquote rules of the road, and that they have the constitutional right to be as irresponsible and toxic as they want to be. And you're basically telling them they can't do that.
And that is, I'm telling them that because that's the law of Canada. We, under our charter, have free speech, but we cannot use the speech in the way that harms others. That is a basic tenet of Canadian constitutional law. So no, what's wrong now is that people think they have this right to act irresponsibly, to harm others, to do whatever they want. But if you're living in a society, you can't do whatever you want. You cannot use your freedoms in a way that is calculated to harm others. And so that's the basic premise that we're operating on. So the answer to that kind of argument is, sorry, you're living in Canadian society or European society or British society or the society in these particular states in the United States that are regulating this. And sorry, you don't get to do whatever you want if it's going to hurt other people. So that's as simple as it is. And if we want the rule of law to extend into the digital area, which I think is very important, then we have to bite that bullet and say, and people have to accept that just doing what they want is not necessarily their right. They cannot use their powers and these great powers of amplification that the internet provides to wreak havoc and harm on others.
You know,
Steve, can I?
Yeah, Taylor, forgive me. If you got 30 seconds, that's all the time we got left, so shoot.
You have a right to speak, but you don't have a right to target people with incredibly damaging, harmful content. And I think what's clear here is that by changing the incentive structure and away from ultimate free speech and the maximizing of potentially harmful speech towards making the platforms act more responsibly is how we're going to ultimately minimize these harms.
We are very happy to have been able to maximize your time here on TVO tonight. I want to thank the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Beverly McLaughlin, and her co-chair, Taylor Owen, at McGill University, and Vivek Krishnamurthy from the University of Ottawa for joining us here on Her Majesty's Junior Public Broadcaster tonight. Thanks so much, you three.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The human brain is wired for pleasure and pain. Neurotransmitters carry such messages, and there is no shortage of ways to trigger them. Yes, with the old standards such as drugs and food, but now also with technological quick hits that can be just as addictive and destructive. Dr. Anna Lembke is a professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine and chief of the Stanford Addiction Medicine Dual Diagnosis Clinic. Her new book is called Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence, and she joins us tonight from Stanford, California. Dr. Lembke, it's great to have you on our program. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. I'm going to quote you back to you to get us started here, and then we'll dive in. Here's what you've written. We have transformed the world, you write, from a place of scarcity to a place of overwhelming abundance. Drugs, food, news, gambling, shopping, gaming, texting, sexting, Facebooking, Instagramming, YouTubing, tweeting. The increased numbers, variety, and potency of highly rewarding stimuli today is staggering. The smartphone is the modern-day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine 24/7 for a wired generation. If you haven't met your drug of choice yet, it's coming soon to a website near you. Well, that beautifully sets up what we're going to be talking about for the next 24 minutes or so. So let's start with a basic definition. What is dopamine?
Dopamine is a chemical that we make in our brain. It's a neurotransmitter. So it's a molecule that allows our neurons to communicate. And a neuron is sort of the workhorse cell of the brain that creates the circuits that make our thoughts, emotions, consciousness, everything that we are. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is fundamental to the experience of pleasure, reward, and motivation. It may be even more important for motivation than for reward. So, for example, there's a very famous experiment where rats were engineered to have no dopamine in the specific reward circuit in the brain. And what the scientists discovered is if they put food into the rat's mouth, it would eat the food and seem to get pleasure from the food. But if they put the food even a body length away, the rat would starve to death. In other words, the lack of dopamine made that rat not motivated to get up and go get the food that it needed to survive.
Now, these reward pathways, as it were of course established many, many thousands of years ago. And I wonder how mismatched they are to the world we live in today.
Yes, great question. So our brains have evolved over millions of years of evolution to have us approach pleasure and avoid pain. And dopamine is essentially the signal to approach, to explore, to investigate. It's the signal of a potential reward. But the problem is that we have spent most of human existence in a world of scarcity and ever-present danger. And we now live in a world of overwhelming abundance in which we have access to an almost infinite variety of highly reinforcing drugs and behaviors, and we're largely insulated from pain. And the result is that our brains are reeling in response to the fire hose of dopamine that we're getting from the moment we wake up and touch our phones and drink our caffeinated beverage and eat our, sugar donut, to the Netflix binging we do at night and everything in between.
So can we understand the world we live in today truly without understanding how dopamine works?
I don't think so. I think understanding this basic neuroscience of how we process pleasure and pain is really fundamental to understanding how our ancient wiring is mismatched for the modern ecosystem, and also, importantly, what we can do about it.
I feel a bit like Barbara Walters asking this next question, as you may remember she did of Katharine Hepburn once upon a time when she said, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be? I'm going to take a little variation on that by saying, if dopamine were a person in our lives, what would our relationship with that person be?
I think that would be a person that you would want to distrust somewhat. That would be a person who on occasion might be lying to you about what you should be doing. Because again, what happens is that our brains release dopamine when we ingest a substance or do a behavior that makes us feel good. And from the perspective of survival in a world of scarcity, that's great because that has us seeking out food, clothing, shelter, a mate. But in a world in which you've got TikTok and Facebook and cigarettes and potent cannabis, and it's all so available and so potent and so ubiquitous, we have to distrust those signals of pleasure. And really, we have to kind of create a world within a world in which we learn to restrain ourselves and abstain from too much pleasure, and believe it or not, actually seek out pain or seek out things that are challenging. And the reason for this is because the same parts of the brain that process pleasure also process pain. And they work like opposite sides of a balance. So when we do something pleasurable, the balance tips to the side of pleasure and we release dopamine in the brain's reward pathway. But one of the overarching rules governing that balance is that it wants to go back to the level position, or what neuroscientists call homeostasis. And the way it does that is what's called the opponent process reaction. It first tilts an equal and opposite amount to the side of pain. That's the come down, the hangover, the after effect. And I like to imagine that as these little neuroadaptation gremlins hopping on the pain side of the balance to bring it level again. But they really like it on the balance, those gremlins, so they don't get off when we're level. They stay on until we're tilted an equal and opposite amount to the side of pain. Now, if we wait long enough before we grab another piece of chocolate or watch another Netflix episode, those gremlins hop off and homeostasis is restored. But if we continue to ingest our drug repeatedly over days to weeks to months to years, what happens is we accumulate enough gremlins on the pain side of the balance to fill this whole room. And now we're walking around in a chronic dopamine deficit state. We're experiencing the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance, which are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, dysphoria, and craving or mental preoccupation with our drug. And now we need to use not to get high, but actually just to level the balance and feel normal. And this is really relevant for all of us, not just those who meet, diagnostic and statistical manual criteria for addiction, because we're all ingesting too many reinforcing drugs and behaviors in all these small myriad ways every day. And the result is that I believe we as individuals and as nations are ending up in this dopamine deficit state where we essentially are really unhappy. We don't know why. We feel guilty for being unhappy. In our unhappiness, we're culturally encouraged to reach for another pleasure. And yet doing that actually further tilts our balance to the side of pain in the long run. So again, the intervention is actually to abstain from our drug of choice, whatever it is, that thing that once we start, we have difficulty stopping. Do it for long enough for those neuroadaptation gremlins to hop off the pain side of the balance so that homeostasis can be restored and we can again take pleasure in more modest rewards, and we're not walking around in this dopamine deficit state.
I think anybody who has spent a late night with a tub of Haagen-Dazs can absolutely relate to what you just said. But let's put some numbers on this just to set up this next line of questioning, because you have said that based on studies with rats, chocolate increases dopamine above baseline by 50%, sex by about 100%, nicotine 150%, amphetamines 1,000%. Okay, these dopamine rushes do give us tremendous pleasure and tremendous reward, but also pain. Is the only prescription here, and I think you hinted at it at the end of that last answer, is the only prescription here abstention?
So the first step, again, is to determine what is our drug of choice, because it's going to be different for different people. The amount of dopamine elevation that you just quoted from that study is based on rats, but rats are different than humans, and humans are different from each other. So what might raise my dopamine level 50% above baseline may not raise your dopamine level, or you may go even higher. So we have to decide what is our drug of choice, that thing that I have this conflicted relationship around, to give that up for 30 days, because that's about the average amount of time it takes to reset reward pathways, to know that in those first 2 weeks, we're going to feel worse before we feel better, because our gremlins will all of a sudden, go to the side of pain and we'll be in withdrawal. But by the time they hop off, we'll go back down to a level balance. But the other thing is that the gremlins are agnostic to whatever the initial stimulus is. So if we press on pleasure by ingesting an intoxicant, they will hop on the pain side. But if we initially press on the pain side, those neuroadaptation gremlins actually hop on the pleasure side. And with repeated use, we end up resetting our balance to the side of pleasure. So that's things like exercise in moderate doses, ice cold water baths, any kind of mind-body activity, intermittent fasting can serve that function, things that are cognitively or psychologically challenging for us that generate anxiety. Because what happens when we press on the pain side of the balance is we essentially signal to our body that there has been an injury. And believe it or not, even exercise, which we know is really healthy, is injurious short-term to cells. But the reason that exercise is healthy, like these other activities, is because our body gets the signal, oh, there's an injury. And then our own re-regulating, restoring mechanisms kick into action. We start to make more dopamine, more serotonin, more epinephrine, these other feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters. And so we get our dopamine by paying for them up front, which is a much healthier and enduring way to get that kind of pleasurable hit.
How do you know, though, when you have crossed the line from sort of moderately unhelpful, unconstructive, unhealthy behavior to out-and-out addiction?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, addiction is a spectrum disorder, right? So you can have mild, moderate, and severe forms. Some of the important things to look for are the 4 C's. So control, compulsion, craving, and consequences. Out of control use means I said I would ingest a certain amount and I ingested more, and I do that on a regular basis. Compulsion means a lot of my mental real estate occupied with the drug, getting the drug, using the drug, a kind of narrowing of my focus and energy and creativity on the drug, as well as initiating the drug with some automaticity, even when I wasn't thinking about it. So a compulsive automatic use. Craving is mental preoccupation and also suddenly overwhelming wanting the drug. And then consequences, is sort of the sine qua non of addiction, the compulsive continued use despite harm to self and or others. Those are the criteria, along with tolerance, needing more and more over time to get the same effect. And with digital drugs, that can take the form of, for example, finding that you need more and more graphic, vivid video games, or you need more deviant forms of pornography, or you just need more in quantity in order to kind of get your dopamine. Why? Because you've got those gremlins accumulating on the pain side of the balance. More sort of, these aren't in the DSM, but things that I see based on my patient experience is that when we start to lie about what we're consuming and how we're spending our time, that's a really strong red flag for the possibility that we have become addicted, or at least entered this realm of compulsive overconsumption. And also when we lose joy in other activities that used to give us pleasure, that means that our motivation and reward system has potentially been hijacked by this intoxicant.
I should ask you about, I love that expression, your mental real estate, because my mental real estate can certainly determine when my kids have been on their smartphones too long and they look like they're addicted to it. But I have to say, in all candor, I don't necessarily know when that's the case for me. So can you help me with that one?
Yeah, such a great point. So when we're chasing dopamine, we often lose the ability to see true cause and effect, especially in ourselves, right? So it can be a very insidious, slippery slope where in the moment, all we know is that it feels good, but we lose track of time. So we become less aware of the amount of time and energy we're investing in it. And especially we lose the ability to see the way that it's harming us, especially those subtle harms, like the way it's impacting our mood, the way it's impacting our sleep, the way it may be impacting in subtle ways our interpersonal relationships and our ability to really be there and be present. And digital devices, I think, are especially insidious because when we're using our device, we essentially disappear for the people around us. But we don't see that because we're, very, very engaged and drawn to this screen, which is why this dopamine fast, or this 30 days of abstinence from our drug of choice, can be so instructive, even if we don't self-identify as addicted. First of all, sometimes we discover we really are addicted when we see how hard it is to stop. But also, stopping can just be a really good way to kind of push the reset button and to get more insight on how our drug use is impacting our lives. And again, when I use that word drug, I'm using it very broadly, not just for traditional drugs that we ingest, but also all of these amazing modern digital drugs that we're all getting so hooked on.
There's something sort of understandable about that 30-day time period that you've recommended here, because people can sort of say to themselves, all right, for July, I'm going off technology, or for July, I'm not having any alcohol, or for July, I'm not doing any ice cream, whatever it is. But is there something actually rooted in science that says 30 days is the time that you need?
Yeah, so there's a seminal study done by Brown and Schuckett, where they took a cohort of adult males who were addicted to alcohol and who also met clinical criteria for a major depressive episode, so for a clinical depression. They took those individuals and they put them in a hospital, but they didn't give them any treatment for depression. All they did was remove their access to alcohol. And after 30 days, 80% of those individuals no longer met criteria for major depression. In other words, just removing the alcohol essentially cured their major depressive episode. That's really, really important, because what that tells us is that substances are the great mimic, and they really can drive these psychiatric symptoms. Although in the moment, those people would have said, like so many of my patients will say, well, using this substance is actually self-medicating my psychiatric problem. But that's because they don't appreciate the ways in which at first using that substance might have relieved anxiety, depression, insomnia. But over time, because of neuroadaptation and accumulation of those gremlins on the pain side, essentially what happens is they make that psychiatric symptom worse. So that's really important. And that 30-day trial with men with alcohol use disorder, abstaining for a month and being relieved of their depression is a very good indicator that it does take about a month to reset those dopamine reward pathways. I've been practicing psychiatry for almost 30 years. I do that as a primary clinical intervention in many of my patients, abstaining from pornography and masturbation for a month, abstaining from video games for a month, abstaining from cannabis for a month, whatever it is. And I have had a similar kind of a statistic where about 80% of folks will come back after that month with no other intervention and feel much, much better with significant improvement in their psychiatric symptoms. Now, importantly, 20% won't, right? So that's also really good data, because that tells me, okay, well, the substance or the kind of compulsive overconsumption that they're doing isn't the main driver of their psychiatric symptom. Or often it'll be a combination. So they'll come back and they'll feel better, but they still won't feel entirely well. I will also say that 30 days, in my experience, is sort of like the bare minimum to kind of begin to reset reward pathways for people with severe addiction. Really getting back to that baseline homeostatic dopamine firing level probably takes on the order of 3 to 6 months, or in some cases, even out to 18, 24 months. So it kind of depends on the person. There's also some interesting neuroimaging studies showing that 2 weeks is not sufficient. So there's a very famous study by Nora Volkoff, the head of the National Institute of Drug Abuse, showing that if you take people who have been using a myriad substances in an addictive way and you image their brains 2 weeks after they stop, what you find is they have decreased or abnormally low dopamine transmission in the nucleus accumbens, which is this reward circuit. And that's also consistent with my clinical experience. I'll have patients who will abstain for 2 weeks and they say, I still feel terrible. I was like, yeah, that's because you're still in withdrawal, right? You've still got gremlins on the pain side of your balance. But if you can just hang in there and make it to week 3 or week 4, they'll start to hop off. You'll reassert homeostasis and you'll feel better.
I wonder, though, if there are some patients for whom abstinence just is a bridge too far and they have to taper as opposed to just completely go cold turkey. Is that the case for some?
Yeah, absolutely right. And thank you for raising that. So this is not an intervention I would recommend for someone who's repeatedly tried to stop and was just unable to do it. That individual needs a higher level of care. Maybe they need to go to a residential treatment facility. I would also not recommend this for somebody who's on a substance for which abruptly stopping would give them life-threatening withdrawal. That includes prescription benzodiazepines or even benzodiazepines obtained in other ways. Benzodiazepines are a class of sedatives that include things like Xanax, Valium, Ativan. So for those individuals, you want to taper down slowly because the withdrawal from those substances can be life-threatening. Likewise with alcohol. So many people can stop alcohol right away, but some people are at risk for life-threatening withdrawal. Also, opioids can be very painful withdrawal, and in some rare instances, life-threatening. So for those individuals, I recommend that you seek the help of a medical professional and get their advice on whether you can stop abruptly or whether you really need to taper down slowly over time.
I don't mean to get all religious on you in asking this next question, but Buddhism has long seen desire and craving as sources of our own suffering, and I wonder whether you think Buddhism, in some sense, is a way to try to keep dopamine in check.
Yeah, so Buddhism talks about walking the middle path, right? Not clinging to a pleasure and also not clinging to pain, because we actually can, in extreme forms, get addicted to pain as well. But rather walking this middle path between the two. But Buddha lived over 2,000 years ago. The world was very different then. We now live in a world of shocking overabundance where almost every human behavior has been drugified in some way. So even healthy and adaptive sources of dopamine, like making human intimate connections, which releases dopamine through oxytocin in the reward pathway, has become drugified through things like social media, which means that the wisdom of the Buddha still applies, but it needs a footnote or an addendum, which is to say we actually need to veer slightly off the middle way and a little bit toward pain, because we're so inundated with pleasure and so insulated from pain that I think we really need a new form of asceticism. We need to seek out things that are hard. We need to intentionally make things less convenient. And we need to do that not only for ourselves, but also to save our planet. Our compulsive overconsumption which is really the dark side of capitalism, is not just leading to our own demise, but it's also leading to the demise of this beautiful planet that we live on.
Well, let me get you to react to something that a previous guest on this program, Paul Bloom, the psychologist, who had a book called The Sweet Spot. I see you nodding. I guess you know Paul.
Yeah.
Here's 30 seconds of what he recently had to say about this on our program. Then we'll come back and chat in our last minute or so. Shelton, if you would.
Nobody says, oh, I'm going to run a marathon. I hope I get blisters. I'm going to run a marathon. I hope I give up halfway through. Nobody who chooses to have kids says, I hope for sleepless nights and anxiety and arguments with my partner and everything like that. But if it didn't have those as part of it, it wouldn't carry any weight. I sometimes think we're not sufficiently reflective about what we ourselves like. I think people often think, I just like to have a good time. That's all that has value to me. And then if you do a deep dive into your life, or you look at the research into people who've had good lives, you find that the sort of suffering lies there as a sort of hidden component, the secret sauce that makes things better.
The secret sauce. You want to react to that?
Oh, I love that. That's great. Yeah. So it's a really important point about how we find meaning and purpose, and also I would say how we find joy, because the point is that pain is really important and it informs our lives, and it's also how we were evolved over millions of years to be in the world. We were evolved for pain. We were meant to suffer. We are good at that. We are natural strivers. And what's happened is that not only have we created this world, this modern world, through technology and innovation, all these great things, but we're insulated from pain. We're constantly bombarded with pleasure. And as a result, we are sick. We are physiologically unwell, because that's not what we were meant for. We were meant for friction. We were meant for challenge. And I believe we're actually happiest walking uphill.
I presume we have only whetted the appetite for our viewers and listeners to learn more about this, in which case they should read Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence. Anna Lemke, it's been a great pleasure having you on our program tonight. Thanks for joining us from Stanford, California.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, June 14th, 2022. Tomorrow, we'll get an update on the war in Ukraine that's been going on now for almost 4 brutal months. Also, longtime foreign correspondent Hillary Brown will be here on her new memoir, War Tourist. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.